Okay, thanks. So I'm going to talk about 6 kinds of things that Sentinel has done that are in some way relevant to the topic of effectiveness or efficacy, with the idea that they might be things that could scale. And here's the Sentinel website, and I'll spend a minute getting us all on the same page about what Sentinel is. Here are my disclosures. Sentinel's charge actually includes effectiveness. The FDA, for very good reason, has had Sentinel focused almost exclusively on safety topics, but effectiveness is in its mandate. And I'll also say that its sort of subsidiary charge is to create the data informatics methodologic capabilities to support safety activities. Sentinel is heading into its 9th year. As many know, it was created in response to the FDA Amendment Act, requiring FDA to create the capability to use electronic health data to support post-marketing medical product evaluation, and it takes its current form in large measure thanks to the foresight of Janet Woodcock and Rachel Sherman and Melissa Robb. So the basic notion of Sentinel is that it has created a highly curated, distributed data set that, although distributed, adheres to a common data model, and it's used for medical product safety surveillance. But from its inception, FDA has always had the intention that the capabilities and the resources that Sentinel creates would be used to support a wide variety of activities. And I'd say the 3 at the bottom here fall within the general category of the topic that we're talking about today. Sentinel is comprised of a large number of organizations, including the ones in the middle band that bring both scientific expertise and data. And I'm pleased that my colleague Marcus Wilson is here from HealthCore, and Mark Horberg from the Healthcare Systems Research Network. And we're about to stand up the CMS fee-for-service population as another node in Sentinel. The backbone of Sentinel is information in a common data model, and by requirement, everyone has to have administrative data. And a major advantage of having administrative data as a backbone is because of the data that's on the left, an enrollment file that gives beginning and ending dates during which time you have reasonable expectation that medically attended care will be recorded. So while people might get their care in a variety of different organizations and their information might end up in a variety of different electronic health records, the administrative data will likely know about that care. It's a set of linked flat file records, so technically it's a very, very simple system. Not so widely appreciated is the fact that the Sentinel data model includes clinical data, laboratory test results, and vital signs, which some of our data partners populate. It can accommodate registry data. It has tables for death data, cause of death, and immunization records, and it accommodates inpatient data. At the moment, that's inpatient pharmacy and transfusion data. One of the things that makes Sentinel data useful is the fact that it's extensively curated before it's used. That means that when the agency has a question, we don't have to stop and do the data quality assessment. And we invest quite a lot of time and energy and taxpayers' dollars in curating the data. And I won't spend time on that, but it is. It shouldn't be the secret sauce, but it is an important differentiator between Sentinel and other large medical data sets. And Sentinel uses a distributed system, which means our data partners all keep their own data in its transform form behind their data set, and it's interrogated by the exchange of executable programs, which they don't modify. They can read them, they can understand them, they can decide whether they want to respond to a query, but they don't modify the programs. And then the operations center, which is where my home is, receives back the responses and integrates them into a single report. That's yielded a distributed data set that has hundreds of millions of person years and billions of encounters, and about 10% of the people have some laboratory test results. And while that's small as a fraction, it's a lot of people with laboratory test results. So I realized that different people have different kinds of tastes, and so I appreciate the fact that what some people would take as good evidence of efficacy or effectiveness might not appeal to others at all. But with that said, I'll say the 6 examples that I'm going to give are, what's an example of the way one might use the Sentinel data set as I just described it to you? What if we link it with full-text medical record adjudication? Because one of the very important things about all the Sentinel data partners is they are part of living, breathing delivery systems, and they have the ability to go back to original medical records. They can go back to providers. They can go back to their members. What happens when you can link Sentinel to registries? What happens when you link Sentinel to electronic health records, to patient-generated data? And can Sentinel be a home for clinical trials? So here we go. And since I'm just going to sort of hop from wave crest to wave crest, I hope, without sinking below one of these. These are all taken from work that Sentinel has done. And these were projects, the things I'm going to describe are things that were not necessarily intended for this kind of presentation. So my apologies to my colleagues whose work I'm representing. We did a pilot study of rivaroxaban to test our ability to do prospective surveillance. And I'm not going to talk about the sequential analysis piece, which was really the heart of what we were doing here. But this is an attempt to test the ability of Sentinel to use one of its standard tools. We focus a lot on reusable executable code for which you change the specifications, but you don't change the code because it's highly vetted. And if you have questions about the subtleties of the analysis, they're readily available for discussion. So this is an incident cohort propensity score matched analysis comparing rivaroxaban to warfarin, now an old topic. But our reusable tool is capable of doing this kind of analysis. It controlled for over 70 confounders, including age and sex and year and comorbidities and utilization and diagnoses and procedures and specific medications relevant to these kinds of questions, and used Cox regression stratified by data partner and the match sets to estimate a hazard ratio. And I always think these things are fun. These are the propensity score distributions, and you can see that the warfarin group and the rivaroxaban group are wildly different in each of the 4 data partners in whom we did this. And after you do the propensity score matching, they line right up. So propensity score matching works great. And of course, you will say, but of course you have to know what the confounders are. I've shown here how Sentinel, these results lined up to the Rocket AF results for GI bleed and intracranial hemorrhage, where they match very, very closely. Let's see. They don't match quite so closely for ischemic stroke, and so you have to say, well, whom should we believe? And I'd say, I'm not in my content area here, but this year there was a meta-analysis of 10 trials that gave a result that looks like this, 0.75, which is intermediate between Rocket's 0.94 and Sentinel's 0.61. But I will point out that the meta-analysis shows that rivaroxaban has a confidence interval that does not include 1, which is true of Sentinel but not of Rocket. So take that as you will. I think that how is this useful? I'd say to the extent that that an observational study it correlates well with randomized trials that we believe, that should give us some confidence that we can be attentive to how the product is working in actual practice, and we can explore populations that are not well represented in the clinical trial. It's a personal observation. Others may not agree with it, but it seems to me there are ways to decide whether observational data is credible enough for purposes for which a clinical trial won't be done. What about chart review? This is work that we did at the request of the Center for Biologics looking at intussusception related to rotavirus vaccine. Long history on rotavirus vaccines, but at the time we did this study, there were two vaccines on the market that made the claim that there was no excess risk of intussusception. So the Center for Biologics asked us to do a study looking at this. And I won't talk about that safety outcome, but I will point out that this was a study that needed CPT codes to identify the immunization and CPT and ICD-9 codes for the outcomes. But we know that those codes are not sufficiently specific to do high-quality epidemiology. And so in order to get a credible result, we needed actually to review the full-text records. And so that's what we did. We used the electronic data to identify a relatively small number of children whose charts we needed to review. So out of 500,000 children and 1.2 million doses, the algorithm we used identified 300 and some potential cases. Of those, we were able to obtain just about 80% of the full-text medical records. And then when we adjudicated them, as we expected, about half of them proved to be the cases we cared about. That was still plenty of cases to be able to say that there was a risk of intussusception of about 1.5 per 100,000 kids immunized. Why did the original clinical trials say there was no risk? Well, those trials were 60,000 kids, and so the expected number of cases was 0 in those. And so the label was changed on the basis of this. This is not an effectiveness or an efficacy study, but it does show the value of being able to link administrative data to full-text records. What about linking to registries? We have had great interest, and FDA has been supporting our linking maternal data to infant data. Since the 1980s, this has been the kind of thing that's just bedeviled health services research. The fact that infants show up for very few hours on their mother's record, and then they achieve records of their own, and you would think it would be absolutely straightforward to link them, and it absolutely isn't. So we're actually, we've done a fair amount of work that gives us a fair amount of promise. So we use the administrative data we have to attempt the link. And so we had linked mom-infant pairs, we had unlinked mothers, we had unlinked babies. And then we linked with the birth certificate data from 9 states. And that was not a small amount of work. But here's the result. It's an interesting result in my view, because it shows that at the end of the day, we're able to link just over 80% of the records for each of 4 data partners. But look at the method that achieved the link. That is, the data that the health plans already had was responsible for almost all of it. Those little yellow bands that are just about invisible there are the incremental links that were made by having the registry data. Now, that doesn't mean the registry data isn't useful, because there's information on the birth certificates that you don't get otherwise: smoking history, APGAR scores, gestational age. But it shows, first of all, the utility of linking, and the fact that sometimes when we thought we had to link to get better results, that kind of linkage actually wasn't necessary. What about linking Sentinel to EHR data? So I'll use as my example here PCORNet's ADAPTABLE trial, which is the brainchild of my colleague Rob and enabled by Rachel Florence, and now being led very capably by the team at Duke. This is a large, simple trial. Its goal is to randomize 20,000 people who have coronary artery disease to either low-dose aspirin or high-dose aspirin for prevention, with follow-up that will happen largely through the EHRs. There is a computable phenotype that looks like this, and the PCORNet clinical sites all executed this against their electronic data sets that were all in common data model format, similar architecture to the Sentinel system. And then this is a study that's underway with follow-up is largely by patient self-report through an electronic portal, but with additional follow-up by linking to claims data. And I've put the red oval on the fact that, that it was always the plan to link to payer data. That work is happening now with 2 Sentinel data partners, Anthem, HealthCore, and Humana. And it's an important piece of the follow-up of that work. So another way that Sentinel data can be useful. what about linking to self-reported data? My colleague, my boss, Michael Sherman, mentioned this earlier today. David Martin at FDA had the sort of foresight to obtain funding through ASPE's PCOR Trust Fund for Sentinel to build a mobile app that that enables individuals who have data in the Sentinel system to collect, to report information that would then be easily merged with the system. So these are screenshots from the app, which is being field tested now. The test case we picked is, I couldn't believe we picked something that was this complicated. It's collecting information from pregnant women about things about their pregnancy that you would want to know. What's your smoking history? How much nausea of pregnancy do you have? What over-the-counter drugs are you using? So it collects this information, and the part that's really exciting is the back end is configured so it is very straightforward to merge this information with the individual's information in the Sentinel data set. And we have great hopes for this. The app is built in a way that should make it accessible for a wide array of front ends, different kinds of data collection. And finally, what about Sentinel as a platform for randomized trials? Here's this is a trial that will enroll its first patient, and in fact, its first 10,000 patients in the next couple of weeks. It's called the IMPACT-AFib trial, and you can tell we're hanging out with cardiologists because we have such a snappy acronym. There are five Sentinel health plans that are participating in this trial, and I should have told you that this is what it is. So this is the snappy acronym. It is a direct-to-member outreach for individuals who have atrial fibrillation, are at high risk for stroke, and for whom there's no evidence that they're receiving oral anticoagulants, for which there's excellent evidence. The outreach is both to the members and to their providers. The primary outcome is initiation of oral anticoagulation, and then a bunch of secondary outcomes, including stroke. Everything about this trial in terms of data will come from the existing Sentinel data set. That is, we will identify the individuals and their providers through their information in the distributed Sentinel data set. We'll do the outreach using information that the health plans have. It's not in the Sentinel data set itself. And the outcomes will all be assessed using Sentinel data. This is a schematic of the trial. I'll just say that there's 20,000 members will be in the early intervention phase, and then the other 20,000 will be in a delayed intervention group. So cohort eligibility is determined, as I say, using Sentinel data. These are the eligibility criteria. Risk factors are determined by using algorithms that we've built to convert the CHADS score, to compute the CHADS VAS score, and we used off-the-shelf code to do the preliminary data analysis so that we would know what the sample size would look like. And this is the sort of schematic for how we identified them. And what we found was that these data partners had about 45,000 individuals who appeared to be at risk and who weren't being treated, who would be eligible for randomization. That's why we picked 40,000 as the number that we would randomize. The other thing to show you is that we were also able to see what would likely happen in the year following randomization. And you can see here that, by identifying people with CHADS VAS scores greater than 2, you actually do identify a group that's at substantially elevated risk of TIA or stroke. So our conclusions are that it's possible to identify large populations of individuals who are eligible for intervention, and to be able to support not only the trial feasibility, but implementation and follow-up. There are lots of variations on this theme. It was around this time that the conversation between the PCORnet adaptable team and the Sentinel data partners was lighting up. And if you'll come back to, let me just acknowledge the many people who are doing that. And let's come back to the adaptable trial. This is a computable phenotype. And a lot about this computable phenotype, while it was built for the PCORNet data model, much of this is computable in the Sentinel data model. And so our colleagues at HealthCore said, why don't we run that algorithm on our database? And there are 150,000 HealthCore Anthem members who are eligible for this trial. And Marcus, I'll look to you to provide me the update, but my understanding is that HealthCore is about to participate as the very largest participating organization in the ADAPTABLE trial. And by using a mechanism very similar to the one that we developed in the IMPACT trial. So that's a quick summary of half a dozen ways that Sentinel might be able to contribute to efficacy, and maybe some of you will think that you like it for this kind of purpose. So thank you.